Okay, we're live. We're live. Okay. Sean came up with this title, so I'm going to let him announce it.
Well, welcome to all who are watching, to the Dear Colleague, You're a Colonizer.
And where does that come from, Sean?
Yeah, the big thing about that is if you've been hiding under a rock and did not understand in the Super Bowl halftime show, then this is something that you might have missed. So in the Drake and Kendrick beef, Kendrick noted that, for lack of foul language I'll use, that Drake was not a colleague, but a colonizer. And this Dear Colleague letter from the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, is exactly embodying the white supremacy that we see, hear, and understand.
Come to know and love.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go around, say our names and what we do. Some of us we've all gotten to know each other throughout the years. Brandon introduced me to Buc-ee's, which was the joy of my life. But Brandon, why don't you go ahead and do your intro?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Brandon Mack, pronouns he, him, his, founder and owner of BMack Strategies, a full-service consulting firm that does college admissions, all sorts of stuff. As I like to say, I'm a activist, educator, all-around angelic troublemaker.
Okay. Angelic. I like that. Okay, Sean?
Yes. Hi, Sean Whitten. I am Director of Strategic Partnerships over at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. A quick disclaimer before I officially begin here, of course, is that the titles and affiliations that I am providing are for identification purposes only, and any views expressed by me are mine alone and not reflective of Southern Methodist University or its constituent institutions. Thank you.
Okay, Alicia, do you have a disclaimer as well?
I guess, yeah, same Z's. So I am, my professional identity is a high school counselor, and I work at a private independent school in Pittsburgh. So yeah, the views that I express are 100% mine, even though I'm sure my institution might share some of them. I don't need to say which ones.
Okay. And you're also a PhD candidate.
So yeah, I'm a PhD student at the University of Pittsburgh.
Yeah. Okay.
Come on, Dr. Yes.
Okay, so my name is Jenn. I run Jenn the Tutor. We're figuring it out day by day, every single day. We figure out what we're doing. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was like, we just kind of go where the community needs us to go. So the point is never fixed over here. The views are my own because I run this. So, you know, and what I will be, I don't know if I'm going to be bringing my law hat into this today, but I do have a law degree. I am a licensed attorney in this Commonwealth, not the state of Virginia. And I think Pennsylvania is our second Commonwealth. So
yeah, we are a Commonwealth. That's great.
Commonwealth. So, all right. Okay, let's talk about the letter. You know what? I always leave the heavy lifting for Sean. Sean, explain the letter to people. What?
I love it. Sean, just explain it.
Sorry, it was February 14th, and out of nowhere, a letter comes from the Department of Education, which I was shocked, like, that still exists, but okay.
For now.
Right.
Apparently today it might be dismantled.
So the department sends out this, Dear John letter, essentially, right? That's essentially, noting more of it's unlawful, as they say. So kind of just summarizing, it's unlawful to consider, an applicant's racial status in college admissions, expounding on the SFFA account, but then extending that the context will need to go or does go into early childhood, K-12, and anyone who's receiving federal funding.
Right.
So they are targeting using race in decisions, and I'm reading it specifically, pertaining to admissions, hiring, promotion, compensation, financial aid, scholarships, prizes, administrative support, discipline, housing, graduation ceremonies, and any student, academic, and campus life.
Right.
Essentially negating any and all progress and or celebration of diversity across education at every level. And they warned that they would start pulling monies in this letter if everything wasn't compliant by February 28th.
Right. Okay, so let's start with, I don't know if everybody has the letter up because I have it in front of me. What was the first line that caught your eye? Anybody? Because my first line, dear colleague, was the first thing that I said, this is not going to go the way I think. American education institutions have discriminated against students on the basis of race, including white and Asian students, many of whom come from disadvantaged background and low-income families. They go on to say, in a shameful echo of a darker period in this country's history, many American schools and universities even encourage segregation by race at graduation ceremonies, dormitories, and other facilities. And then footnote 3 for me was my favorite, one of my favorites, which said, this guidance does not have the force and effect of law and does not bind the public or create legal standards. So I was like, okay, so this is just like your vibes, right? Like, thanks for letting us know. Anybody else? Any thoughts when you initially read the letter? Go ahead, Brandon.
For me, when it said the department will no longer tolerate the overt and covert racial discrimination that has become widespread in this nation's educational institutions, I was like, so does that mean we're scrapping the whole thing?
Right.
Because I'm like, you're completely negating what you're talking about. All of these things were implemented in order to combat racial discrimination, to make institutions more inclusive. And you're saying that, oh, all these other things now have somehow overtly and covertly instilled racial discrimination. I'm like, y'all need a history lesson. I'm like, let's go back. Y'all need to go back to class or something, or whoever is teaching you history is doing this wrong. But on top of that, I was like, so does this mean we're scrapping the whole process, which I'm like, kind of cool. Let's rebuild this then so that it isn't instilling racial discrimination. That's what we're talking about. Clearly, you go for the rest of the letter, you're like, that ain't what they talking about.
Alicia, did you have any points of the letter that stood out to you?
The whole thing is kind of goofy and ridiculous. I think, to Brandon's point, it's completely ahistorical, right? Like, they just start out saying, like, discrimination is really bad. Like, yeah, who's going to disagree with that? Like, sure, discrimination is not a cool thing. But then the rest of it, really just reads like, some wealthy white boy got told that, he wasn't going to get valedictorian of the class with his 2.5 because all the students with 4.0s are being awarded, right? Like, it's pathetic. But I think it counts on people not being well versed in history. It relies on people not having a sense of what the process looks like for conversations or for affinity spaces. Like, it relies on people's ignorance.
Right. And it's also, for me as a lawyer, it was a very expansive document that went significantly further than the SFFA. So my spirit just never wants to say that. But for me, I think one of the things is, having gone through law school and having gone through everything, the one class that everybody kind of dreads, or at least I did, with civil procedure, where they say, this is how you have to bring a case to the forefront. If you're doing a civil case, this is how you do it. And for me, the one thing, as somebody who's not good at civil procedure and never liked civil procedure, the idea that a class can be formed after the fact. None of these people were in this organization as SFA. None of them actually existed in this organization. And then they all just came together to say, like, we just have this grievance. Mm-hmm. And now the Department of Education saying, and you know what? It also includes scholarships, and it also includes and it also includes graduation, and it also includes dorms, and it also includes, no, it does not. But the fact that you're even taking on the position of being the interpreter of the law is utterly absurd. Ethan, I think we all know Ethan. He says, hi, friends. Thank you for leading the session. I was struck by educational institutions have toxically indoctrinated students with false premises that the United States is built on systemic and structural racism. Thoughts?
Prove it. False? How?
Right.
Let's see.
Where?
Let's see where you can prove that these systems actually don't exist and haven't existed since 1492, even prior.
Right.
Prove it. Let me see you prove it.
I love that Sean raised his hand. Sean.
Sorry, Dr. Oglesby.
That's right.
I subscribe to this fantastic newsletter from the Equal Justice Initiative on the history of racial injustice, right? And it has a calendar that hosts the things that have happened throughout American history. Do you know what today's was about?
What's today's date?
Today is March 6th. And in March, on the morning of, so maybe ironically, coincidentally, the morning of March 6, 1857, a Chief Justice read a majority opinion against Dred Scott. On this day today, that they would need to remain enslaved, despite the state law that was in place for Dred Scott, that once free, always free doctrine.
Right.
They ruled at that time, and I want to read this specifically, right? The court viewed the principle of the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal through the lens of white supremacy. Those words would seem to embrace the whole human family, right? The court acknowledged. However, in a clear dispute that no one had ever intended such equality to apply to Black folks, enslaved or free. By the common consent of all civilized governments and families of nations, the court said, the Negro race had been doomed to slavery. So when we talk about, in this, the colleague letter stating that we aren't attuned and or understanding that there are structural pieces already built, we only have to look at firsthand documents, right? We can see that these are the things already built in. So Ethan, to your point, that line sticks out because even today, the anniversary, if you will, of Dred Scott, we can see that, and I'm going to use a term because I have to, being woke, being conscious means that you are always understanding of the context, right? And so we're not missing the point. The dear colleague, is missing the point of the history of this nation and trying to enforce something that they just don't want to see. That there's a blissful ignorance to the fact that there is shifts as we were moving forward, right? So to me, and I'm glad you pointed that out, Ethan, thank you. Because I'm chomping at the bit to talk about Dred Scott today. Is the fact that there's a willful ignorance, right? There's this willful ignorance to the understanding right? That the principles that we we started this country on and that we imbue in our education to students, and especially in higher education, that we're not living to those values. We're not living to those mottos, right? I went through the top 10 of the U.S. News and World Report college's mottos. Many of them talk about truth and veritas, I guess is the Latin term, right?
Right.
And working towards understanding and or equality in that way. So it is both imbued that we would have equity and a celebration of diversity in the fabric of these first account documentations. And now that those are trying to be repealed to fit a Eurocentric white supremacist culture, this Dear Colleague letter is attempting to do that in the foundation of bringing people to that same consciousness, right?
Right.
We're missing the point. But I don't want to keep myself on a high horse or sit in a pedestal.
We like the pedestal.
I yield my time.
Okay. I mean, Brandon, I know you're chomping. Go ahead.
Well, first off, I'm glad that you yield your time. Congress, if you're watching, this is what you're supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to act. I'm so glad that you brought this up because, once again, that's been one of the essential problems with taking this essential history out of the classroom, because we end up repeating the same stuff over and over again. And so I'm so glad that you brought up Dred Scott, because can we honestly say that Dred Scott is even taught now in K through 12 education? No. And why? Because, it makes people, quote unquote, feel bad. Racism is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for those of us who experience it. It's for those of you who feel like, you had nothing to contribute with it. It's uncomfortable. But the only way we're going to overcome it is we got to go through it and we got to address it. And it's things like this that make it hard to be able to do that. And it's things like this that miss the point. This is a huge overreach. The other big thing for me is the fact that I'm like, it was bad enough that it was in admissions, but now it's like anything that is construed to help those who are not pale, male, and stale, old white men, who education was originally intended for, it's bad. We're eliminating it. We're trying to literally go back to when Harvard was the only institution, and Harvard was the only institution there to educate property-owning white men. That's what I feel this is. And for me, the thing is that now it's up to institutions for you to prove who you for. Who you for? Are you for the education of everybody? Are you really for the values that you express? And if that value is truth, the truth is we here. The truth is the people who you say that you are for are here. Are you going to be about it?
Right. I think it's interesting to say the country's not built on structural and systemic racism while arguing that there is racism against white and Asian individuals in admissions, like pick a lane. I don't know about you, Alicia, part of the 92%. There's something super beautiful about knowing that none of us had to talk to one another to get on the same page. And I think it's interesting. You see people arguing now about like, how should we go forward? And I'm like, maybe you should talk to the people who did not need to coordinate to get to a 92%. I don't want to hear from anybody below 80. I don't know why anybody else is talking right now, because all you should be asking us is how do we get there? But I would say after the election, it's very difficult. And I'm not sure if you felt the same way, Alicia, waking up and knowing that Black girls got the message. You can be significantly better. You can do everything better. You can be the best. You can have not concepts of plans, but actual plans. You can say, this is what our country stands for, and this is what we believe. You can do all of that. and it's not going to be enough. And for me, having to confront that reality as an adult is one thing, but then looking at other Black girls, especially ones who this was their first vote, and having that conveyed to them, like, what if it's never going to be enough, was a harsh reality. And then seeing this also creates it. But I feel like I've been going through the stages of grief as we go through all of these. And for me, one of the things that I have noticed is I don't care if Harvard doesn't want to come along. I just hope that you all make your positions as clear as possible. There is beauty in some of you saying, we don't need to do this anymore, because I want those people out of the way. I do not want to keep sending kids to colleges that say that they're for them when they're actually against them. Alicia, how do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that 100%. And so I mean, there's so many things that come to mind when you describe this. One, certainly the solidarity amongst Black women. I mean, that has been there for centuries and centuries, out of necessity and also out of our inclination to uplift each other. Right? Like, even for, I mean, we've known each other for years, Jen, and there has never been a conversation about, you know, explicitly helping each other. It's just inherent in who we are as Black women. And I think that it's such a remarkable and beautiful thing. But it's also, you know, we have this window into this world that doesn't see it and doesn't get it, doesn't value it, doesn't appreciate it, doesn't uplift it. And, you know, it's sad for them. And I think, you know, it's tricky because when Kamala Harris was running for president, I took my daughter to one of the rallies in Pittsburgh. Super well attended, lots of people, lots of families, lots of children. And it was exciting. And I remember thinking on the way home, because we had to, it was an obstacle just to get to the rally. On our way home, I remember thinking, she's probably not going to win. Right? Like all the love in my heart that I have for my fellow Bison. I also know where I live, in terms of Pennsylvania, in terms of the United States of America. And so that's not lost on me. I think being from and within the margins, we have a particular perspective about what happens in the mainstream, or what happens, you know, in circles that pride themselves on being Harvard alum, or Columbia alum, or being a part, affiliated with these institutions that have historically been incredibly active in marginalizing communities and displacing neighborhoods, right? So we are aware that all of this happens at the same time that we are trying to make the place a better place, right? Trying to make this country a little better. Like, we just want to help you out a little bit, right? Like, we might not want to, you know, overthrow the whole thing right now, but we're just trying to get you to at least find some level of democratic process that's legitimate and stable, right? But no, you don't want us to? Okay, here we are. And so, yeah, I think absolutely that shows up in my practice, working with Black girls who rely on my truth and who rely on our shared honesty about what this system is and what it attempts to do to us, specifically as Black women and girls.
Right.
Yeah.
Sean, how does this play out in the higher education space? We get this scary letter and we get the NACAC response, which love the response. Ethan's talking about Sean Harper's response. always, I mean, I think Sean Harper should just be on every NACAC, conference that we ever have. Just like, let's just build that into the program. But how does this play out? Because it feels like everybody with bad intentions looks for this letter as like, oh, I really wish we could help those Black kids, but like, dear colleague, how is it playing out? And what is the feeling in the higher education community? And what did you think? I don't know if you read the Sean Harper 11 points that he said you can do to get everything, keep going, but what is your feeling and thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the big thing is in the higher education space, I know, especially in college admissions specifically, right? Like I can only speak to this personal experience. Many students look at highly rejective institutions and as the leader, right? And that is the norm, right? And those aren't, we know that those aren't the case, and we know that that's not true. But it really can sometimes vilify college administrators, right? And so like college admissions professionals or student affairs folks or financial aid offices in that same token. And I believe overwhelmingly that these are individuals who came into this work, who work in the higher education space, who want to see the elevation and empowerment of students throughout their time when they start the process to think about college to when they go out into the world and work in the workforce, right? And so when I'm thinking about this, these are people who want to see success for others. So a lot of this is coming with confusion. It's coming with some real honest, pain, because it may be implied and or engaged in identities that intersect with them. And so they feel just as much as the students have attacked, right? They feel attacked in not only the work that they've thought they were getting into for access or the work that they thought to and getting to for student success. And so that's kind of the pall on campus, right? These individuals are really trying to find the crevices that will help them to challenge in a way that will build for not just a success now, but what the next steps will be like, right? And so like on campus is showing up in, number one, over compliance, right? Like there's a pre-suasion that's already happening. There's this pre-compliance, right? And I think about what we see from our president's tweets or whatever else he's putting on social media, like they're already being construed as law, and it's just a social media post, right? So we're already in this fascist beginning of brain, right? And so like on campus, we're already, on higher ed campuses, as I talk to others, we're complying with what's being set out and isn't necessarily already put in place with an injunction, right? So there has been institutions that have already started to fight in the courts. So like the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Ed, the AAUP professors, they're taking on some of these DEI executive orders and winning injunctions to date. And so we have that broadly for DEI, but for the Dear Colleague letter and this Q&A letter and or whatever that was that continues to expand other things, we are continuing to question, like, what is it that we need to do to continue to serve students well while complying with the appropriate federal law. My personal opinion is that we are doing far too much in being complicit before it is stated as the law. I can't keep coming back to the idea that slavery was law, Jim Crow was law, Like, these things were law of the land, and we are complying to that, right? As higher education institutions, our very founding was challenged to many of the laws in those places, right? HBCUs, minority serving institutions, predominantly Black institutions, institutions like that are going against the grain and are providing some levels of equity and inclusion that should be celebrated, but are being particularly targeted because of the fact that we are trying to have some type of redress to a time, like Brandon and Alicia have both said, that, and I love Brandon's, pale, stale, and the like, to a time where it has an exclusionary practice. And so I think I believe on campuses, we're contending between challenge and compliance. What are the routes that we can challenge internally, externally, and whatnot? And then how are we complying to continue to be a part of our continued federal funding and our continued success with that funding, right? What's missing, I will say, on the higher ed space is communication. For example, on our campus, we did not hear about our compliances from anyone else outside of a student newspaper. So kudos to our student newspapers. And these students are fantastic, right? They are keeping their pulse of what's going on. They are moving forward in the progress that they want to see, and challenging in the right ways, right? Or I should say, the ways that are being told to them. And so it's that's happening on campus that it's missing, right? There's no, hey, we're doing these things. It's very silent. And so we are just to trust, right, that something's happening. And if you didn't already trust your institutions, right, how are you going to do that as a part of chaos or in the midst of chaos? So communication is something that I'm not seeing, right? We're not seeing outside of the news of like, oh, University of Iowa's gotten rid of this, or USC has gotten rid of this, or Ohio State got rid of their diversity programs and or office, right? Like, that communication's coming externally from someone else. It's not necessarily internal to the students and staff you're serving,
Right.
to how you're going to serve moving forward.
Right.
So we have a communications crisis issue on the high side.
I mean, in my institution, so my undergraduate institution, Virginia Tech, they renamed the Black Cultural Center because they are one of the people with $1 billion endowment. And I think even having a statement that says, like, we're doing this because there's an executive order that says that we have to do this, but this will always be the BCC for us. So, yep, we're going to comply to avoid a lawsuit, but we're not necessarily happy about it. And like, there's nothing as a lawyer illegal about saying we're complying. We're trying to avoid a lawsuit. We don't necessarily know where the courts are going to go with this, so we're going to take a deferential approach. However, it's you, I, and everybody knows that space is the BCC, and I would love for somebody to tell us otherwise. I think that's the kind of bold action that I'm hoping to see from presidents and other leaders to say, yeah, you can talk about race in your application. Nobody can tell you what to write in your application, like, right? And even though you know what? I did have a favorite part of the Dear Colleague letter. And this shout out to, I'm not sure if it's still David and Janet running ACT and SAT College Board, but I am so happy that test optional was viewed as such a threat that it was mentioned explicitly. And now College Board and ACT are on the side with this administration. And nobody can know at any point deny. You know who loves tests required? Donald Trump and friends. There's sometimes where somebody does something that's a blessing rather than a burden to you. They think it's going to be a burden. And I said, won't he do it? There it is. Test optional is the language of the resistance. And now nobody can deny that. And thank you. And legacy admissions, we're talking about quotas and things like that. I went back through the SFFA case and I was like, it's really interesting. And Brandon, I'll have you talk about this because you've been on the other side of the desk, that we're saying race is the only thing that's pushing these kids over. It's like, and then we found out they were Black and that was the only thing, as if legacy admissions doesn't exist, donor admissions doesn't exist, your kids from Kansas doesn't exist, you're Black, but you're from Kansas, so we can't have too many Black kids from Kansas, doesn't exist, like as if there's not 50 other factors, and as if there's not an explicit quota. We know right now, Dartmouth, I am talking to you, who invented legacy. And for those of you who say, no, I thought that was Harvard, it was Dartmouth. It was 1913, I believe the date was. They created legacy to exclude Jewish students. Dartmouth, we know right now, without even looking at the data, that between 10 and 15% of your class will be legacies. We know that. And the only reason that you're going to get away with it is because you're going to sprinkle in some Black legacies and say it's not just all about race. Although some of us can't have a legacy because you excluded us. So there was some points of joy for me. And I think before I turn it over to Brandon, because I feel a little bit invigorated in knowing that I was right. And nobody can deny it now, because I can always say, I hear what you're saying, but Trump endorsed tests required. I just want to say somebody better squabble up, because I cannot wait for the rest of you to get out of our way. And I'm working on a project. Sean's been working on it with me. I'm going to talk to you guys about it as well. But don't think the only threat is coming from the right. We're not going to keep letting you use our kids for your promotional materials, for your whatever. I am not sending kids to, like, the Gettysburg situation broke my heart. And if you don't know about the Gettysburg situation, the kid had people he trusted carve the N-word on his chest. You knew that that was your culture when you recruited that athlete, and you did not protect them. And I know that there are people at Gettysburg who are devastated by this. I get that. I know it's not all Gettysburg, but a lot of you know that your climate is hostile and dangerous. And instead of just saying that to the students so that they're prepared and ready to go and they can decide this is the type of racism that I can tolerate, you all just keep letting them come and keep letting them get into these situations and keep letting them go through racial trauma. And I don't care about social mobility when, if I can look at, yeah, this school, this institution has high social mobility, but the cost of care for your therapy and trauma is going to be significant, and you will not have the same light in your eyes that you used to have. That matters more to me than anything else. I don't care where you're at on U.S. News and World Report. I do not care if you're the greatest institution ever. I care if you're being honest, because racism exists and anti-Blackness exists everywhere. And if all of you would just disclose what we're going to experience, our lives would be better. We know that racism is something that we're going to have to confront. We know that. If you said to me, listen, this is the type of racism that you're going to experience, I can have a conscious choice. I knew going into Virginia Tech, which great institution for me, I knew because I was Black, suburban, I'd gone to mixed race schools, had been in IB programs that were mixed race, which is very rare, but Garfield does a great job of doing that, but had enough experience with white people. I knew that people were going to say to my face that I didn't earn the right to be there when they're 20 generations legacy down, right? I knew that. And knowing that, I knew I could tolerate it and I could make a conscious choice and I could say, this is still my institution. There's not enough transparency. Brandon, let's go. Squabble up.
So many things to say. But one thing I want to kind of bring back, since you brought up the concept of legacy admission, is for us to think about something. Affirmative action got instituted. Once again, we all know who the biggest beneficiaries of affirmative action were. It was white women. It was not Black people. It was not our Latinx, Hispanic folks. Wasn't the AAPI community. But let's think about something. If that started in the 60s, how many generations have created legacies at these institutions? And now all of a sudden we want to call foul. Part of me.
I want to add to that. If you are one generation legacy, which I can only be one generation.
Right.
I can only, like, my mother fought in the civil rights movement, had me at 40, so I'm only one. And the person next to me is coming in with 5 generations of legacy. That's a more powerful legacy.
Exactly.
And we can't pretend otherwise.
Right. And that's my point, is that it's still not equal in terms of how much, but we were starting to generate that. And now all of a sudden it became a problem. So that's what I find interesting always, is that once again, once you start seeing some progress, all of a sudden we want to move the goalposts. We want to constantly move the goalposts and constantly have the expectation of who has to pivot, who has to change, who has to do the additional work, are the individuals who have always had to do the additional work, but have always exceeded the expectation. I want to make something very explicitly clear. When it came to affirmative action, there was never a lowering of standards. Never. It never was, oh, this person is Black. Admit. This person is a person from Kansas. Admit. It always was, we know this inequity exists. We know that the educational opportunities in Kansas are not the same educational opportunities and access in Washington, D.C., or in LA, or in any number of other places. So guess what? We're going to understand that and see, what did this person do in their context to rise to the same standards, the sameness, and be able to come in here and bring all of themselves into this institution. That's what it always has been about, to be honest. It never was, oh, we lowered standards, because then we don't want to talk about what we are also lowering standards. Let's look at that 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 generation student who all they did was get born. All they did was get born. That ain't got merit. And also, I could get on this whole concept of merit, because part of me is also like, wait a minute. How much work have we put in that don't get recognized, that doesn't get publicized or anything of that nature, but therefore is not meritorious, but is? And all you did was get born. All you did was get lucky to be born to the family, and now all of a sudden that is meritorious. We have got to talk about these concepts. We have got to be honest about these concepts. And Marissa, thank you for putting that up, because that's the other thing. We can't be silent about this. And that is where I think all of us have a part to play, is in we keep getting punished if we speak out. We keep getting told, oh, this won't be, you won't have access to this, or you're a troublemaker. And it's no, we need to stop being silent and being complicit in these things. We need to be bold, as you said, of yes, I understand we got to change this name. Fine, I'm going to change that name. But my actions are still here. My actions of supporting these students is still here. We'll call it whatever you need to call it. But as far as we built in this equity, we're building in this equity, and we're going to find other ways to build in this equity. So that way, our students are inclusive, and you know what's going to end up happening? Diversity.
Right. You could, like, even in the changing of the BCC, you could be like, hey guys, we're having a party to celebrate the legacy of the BCC. So, Alicia, I know you have opinions about schools that talk a lot again and then, beat you when you arrive. So I'm just going to let you speak on it.
Yeah, I do. You really spoke to my heart when you were describing the environments that students are going into. And I think there is some flexibility that we need to have, and some grace that we need to show college admissions counselors, because on the one hand, you represent institutions that potentially cause harm to students. On the other hand, you are a human being who wants these students that you are talking to and educating to have these nurturing and nourishing experiences for higher education. So both are true. And I think we have to figure out a way to navigate that together. And so that's something that I try to bring into the conversation, particularly when college admissions counselors visit my school, having conversations with them about some of the things that are happening on campus. I would say 9 times out of 10, admissions counselors are troubled by some of the things that are happening, and trying to figure out how to do good work by students, and also be incredibly limited in the amount of power and influence that they have at their institutions. And so, all of these things make the work really complex and really difficult. But to your point earlier, Jen, that transparency is crucial. And I think we do need to give students and teenagers a lot of credit for being resilient, and for approaching difficult conversations that sometimes even adults aren't prepared to have. I just came from a summit in Nashville. So the Association of College Admissions, or the College Counselors in Independent Schools, we had a summit at Vanderbilt that was really transformative. It usually is. And we had conversations about what students wanted to discuss that the adults in our high schools were not ready or not willing. And I definitely think that this falls, in that category, because there's so much pomp and circumstance around getting in, right? So like colleges, have visit days and open house and, admitted students days, and that's coming up soon. And so when students are getting these decisions and they're getting admitted into these places, there are adults, a lot of adults, who are incredibly invested in this part of the process. And so when a college counselor like me comes along and says, I'm gonna throw a stone at a school and that's where you're gonna go. And you're gonna be fine because you are an incredible person and you're gonna do good work wherever you are. I think it's a reality that adults are, I guess, in my opinion, not shifting away from quick enough. That the transformational part of this process is the point, right? Like, sure, I'm excited that you got into X, Y, or Z. What are you going to do when you're there? And what is that experience going to be like for you? How are you going to transform that campus, and how is that institution going to transform you? And I think that's a conversation that is not had enough. And if we were having it, then we could be more honest about what these environments are doing to young people who are in our 12th grade classes, speaking about Black militancy and revolution and climate change in a way that is passionate and excited, but they're graduating college in 4 years and they're like, I just need a job. I just need a place to stay, I need to get an apartment. I want to have a nice car, and those values and that perspective shifts. So I have a lot more thoughts, but I think that is, ultimately I know that is the goal for some institutions and some sections of our society, to have this hyper-capitalistic framing to all, that you aspire to, because that keeps you away from transforming the society that you're in.
That was a PhD level. Sean, that was a PhD level discussion.
I can't help it. I'm in school student mode.
I think there's this assumption, because I'm Black, that I'm getting it right all the time. And I can tell you what you're getting wrong. And you have to realize that anti-Blackness and racism is a residue that is all around us. It's kind of like dust. And there are days I have to wake up and check myself and say, what you did or what you said was rooted in anti-Blackness, or rooted in white supremacy, or rooted in something that's not necessarily going to serve you. And I have to course correct. And there might be other people who have to course correct me. And so being in community and being around people and just having these discussions is really helpful. I think Sean and I were talking about having this discussion, and we're like, oh my God, you know what? We should have it with Brandon and Alicia, because hearing their perspectives and debating. I will say, as a lawyer, a lot of you aren't significant enough to be sued. Sorry. Also, if you are sued, I don't know if you've seen the justice system lately. You got like 2.5 years before we even get to pre-trial at this point. So you can be like, and by that point, we're probably going to have a new administration. Okay. So maybe chill and maybe focus on whatever. I don't want to miss the opportunity to say there are some people, some institutions, like for me in Virginia, I know Hollins is going to get it right. I know George Mason is going to get it right. I don't have to worry about some institutions in my Commonwealth, because I know that they are reliable, and pushing those to the top during this moment to say, that's not going to impact you at this school or this school because they've always been down for the cause, is significant. So final thoughts as we go out. Who wants to go first? Oh, did everybody knows that I actually did the choreography for Squabble Up? Because I looked it up before I came on. I was like, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Sean, let's start with you.
That was great. I gotta go learn some new dances, what it looks like.
1, 2, 3, 4.
We got it. We on it now. As Alicia, as you were talking, I'm sorry, Dr. Oglesby, as you were talking, if nothing more, we're going to speak that into existence. All right. I kept thinking about Audre Lorde, right? She's her 2 cents was institutionalized rejection of difference is an absolute necessity in a profit economy which needs outsiders as surplus people, right? And like you just said that. And that's what these letters are doing. That's what these executive orders are doing. That's the point, right? Is divide and conquer so that there's such an infighting internally and that it expresses itself externally and that you know that no one's really showing up for each other, right? Audre Lorde also says then that needs to change into define and empower, right? So we need to define for ourselves how we want to challenge, how we want to express compassion, how we want to air our pain so that we can alter it, so that we don't die of it. And I know that's extreme, right? Like, but die of it in the sense that we no longer celebrate our difference. We no longer speak out for the things that are important, but that we need to express and address these grievances so that we can impact some level of change. So I'm hopeful, right? I remain in this radical optimism alongside those who taught me, like Adrian Amador Odie, like Dr. Oglesby, and everyone on this call, right? That no matter what these 6 weeks have taught us in the attack of education, that there is an opportunity in this, right? That we can continue to celebrate and challenge in ways that will uplift. So I don't want that to be lost, right? Because we yapped, we addressed, we did it all in our hour. But I'm a firm believer that this now is not going to be a death to our next, right? Because we have individuals like the three of you, that we have people on and in places that will continue to pursue doing the right thing. Anyway, I yield my time again.
Brandon, and I would say like we have 3 minutes, but we have as much time as we need. So Brandon, your thoughts.
So, as I mentioned before, adapting and pivoting is what we do. So, this is once again where unfortunately we have to adapt and pivot, but I know we know how to do it, and I know we know how to do it well. This is once again where we lean into it, but it's also where I need those who are truly accomplices, not allies, accomplices, meaning you're going to do this work. You value this work. You value the communities that are impacted by this work. This is where I need y'all to step up. Now, we know this can be uncomfortable work. We know this is going to be work where you're trying to get it right. Don't let the messiness stop you from doing the right thing. What's going to mess you up is not doing anything. And we need action. If that is covert action, if that's overt action, what I need to see and what we all need to see is action. So once again, this ain't stopping nothing, because all of us as human beings, we here. We're not going anywhere. We have a right to education, but at the same time, we're not going to go to the places that are not going to respect and honor us. But that also means you got to show up and you got to show and demonstrate that you respect and honor us. So what I say to all of us is the action needs to be there, but at the same time, you got to show the respect and care you have for us, because we should not be going somewhere to suffer in order to be educated.
Exactly. Some of y'all could be the next target, is all I'm going to tell you. There are institutions right now that are the Costco's, and there's institutions that are the target. And you will learn the hard way that you actually need us. And the one thing I want to say, because this came up in a session before we left, is before you tell a kid, should you write about race? Should you not write about race? Should you write about your culture? Think about the impact it's going to have on that kid for the rest of their life to say, hide your race or don't hide your race. Have that discussion with them and say, this is not just going to be about this one time. So you need to decide where you stand, and you get to decide. The one thing that's great about being Black, besides everything, is that you get to decide how to walk in your Blackness, and you get to decide how to show up as a Black person. So if you are going to tell a student, if they come to you and say, hey, should I talk about race or not? You say you have to define who you are. And you have to define what parts of yourself that you're going to give to the world. I am so appreciative to be in community with the three of you. You know, there are days where I'm eating chips and crying and not sure if I'm going to get up. And then there are days where I'm ready to fight. And then there are days where, you know, I'm arguing with Black British people about their soul food. But I appreciate having you all here. And Sean, give us a Kendrick line to get us out. I know, look at you, you're panicked, but you got Euphoria, you got Meet the Grams, you got, you know, Not Like Us, you got all of GNX. What line do you feel like Kendrick would embody on the way out of this? And then I'm going to turn this off. Don't say Drake. I'm going to turn this off to be in here for a second before we go. Don't say Trump either. Go ahead.
Here it is. Got my foot up on the gas, but somebody got to do it.
All right, guys, we're going to end the stream and then we'll talk real quick. All right. Bye, everyone on the live stream.